Chapter 4, Broken, Part 2, by Oliver M. Goldblatt. Romana was still trapped on board the space station Constantinople 12. K9 had gone missing, and the doctor had neither returned nor contacted her. She could only assume things had gone badly on the surface of Megando. And the reason they were here in the first place was to prevent a massive comet from smashing into their world, killing everyone and everything. As if this were not enough, should the comet destroy Megando, it would break what was known as the web of time, the events that must occur in our universe, or else reality itself would break and melt into nothing. The last of the space station's crew were old men, plus one youngster, cut off from their world in more ways than one. And now, they had discovered that a special operations droid was on board, sent by the Gulbansi, with whom the Megandans were at war. They had taken refuge on the command deck, but the security doors were not holding against the droid. Eventually, it would break through. But they had a plan. One of the men, Duff, had a mine which he hoped to place onto the droid's back while distracted. Romana had tried to talk them out of the idea, but there was no time. Private Cod opened the doors, and the droid stepped into the room. It stood, towering over them. "Drop your weapons and step back," the droid ordered. They did so except for Duff, who attempted to hide the mine in the back of his trousers. The droid did not seem to notice him. Instead, he turned to Cod, who was nearest. "You! What is your name?" Cod was too frightened to reply. "It's Gulbansi, all right?" Romana whispered to Manans and Wilkins. "So?" Manans whispered in reply. "The Gulbansi are brilliant engineers, but their programming lacks verve." "What does that mean?" Manans hissed. "It'll be programmed to do one thing at a time and in the correct order. It can't start its next task, whatever that is, until it's finished interrogating us." "Then we might delay it?" Wilkins asked. The droid was now holding its sword near Cod's face. Cod shut his eyes tight as the droid said, "I will ask once more. What is your name?" "Don't tell him, Cod!" Manans shouted, then realized what he had done. "Your name is Cod," the droid said. "Confirm!" Cod nodded vigorously. Then Romana stepped forward. "My name is Romanadvaratna Lunda," she said, "and I inquire whether you are authorized to start a war with the Time Lords." The robot halted as it considered this. "Are you a Time Lord?" it finally asked. "Yes. Truth confirmed," the droid replied, dropping its sword a few inches. Wilkins looked at Manans and motioned with his eyes toward Duff. Duff was slowly inching his way to his left, toward the droid's back. Manans nodded to Wilkins and slowly walked to his right until he was standing next to Romana. "Who are you?" the droid asked Manans. "I'm the captain of this vessel, and while our planets are at war, you have nothing against this young lady. I demand you release her at once. The Time Lords are not listed as non-combatants. Request denied." Manans began to feel sweat running down his face. "But there's diplomatic status to be considered as well," Romana added. The droid paused again. Manans risked a glance at Duff. He was almost there. "What is your diplomatic status and/or rank?" the droid asked Romana. Before she could reply, the droid turned and grabbed the mine from Duff's hands. Duff backed away quickly in mortal terror. "Violence against this unit will not be tolerated," the droid growled as its chest blaster began to glow. Duff closed his eyes as a shot rang out. He opened his eyes to see the droid lurch forward and sink to one knee. The mine fell out of its hand and rolled away. K9 sat in the doorway and fired again. This time the droid fell on its side. "Use full power!" Romana cried. K9 did so, but this time an energy shield appeared around the droid, blocking K9's blasts. The droid rose unsteadily to its feet and faced K9. The robot dog fired again, but to no effect. K9 was forced to back away as the droid advanced, its chest-mounted weapon beginning to glow. Then Manans sprang forward, grabbed the mine off the floor and slapped it on the droid's back. "Down!" he cried. Everyone hit the deck, even Romana. The droid turned, plucked the mine off its back, and deactivated it before it could explode. But this delay gave K9 time to find a weakness in the energy shield. He aimed and fired at full strength. There was a small explosion that sent metal flying across the room as the droid stiffened, swayed for a moment, then collapsed. K9 whirred forward. "Apologies for the delay, mistress," he said. Everyone looked up at K9, then Romana, who stood and dusted herself off. "Think nothing of it, K9. How long until the comet strikes?" 27 standard hours, mistress." The doctor helped Breen through the deserted streets, carved out of the living rock of Megando, with only overhead emergency lights guiding their steps. They saw other bodies nearby, but they stayed as far from them as possible. Breen appeared ill and almost fell several times, but she managed to keep moving. The doctor looked nervously at the shadows around them, as if expecting someone or something to attack. However, they were able to make their way into what looked like cramped living quarters. A door had been pulled off its hinges, but the rooms appeared deserted. The doctor helped Breen into a chair and then began to pace the room, lost in thought. "I thought I'd seen it all," Breen finally said. "Boar worms," the doctor said. "Is that what caused those wounds?" "Yes, someone released them, probably to force an evacuation to the upper levels." "But who?" The doctor stopped pacing and looked at Breen. "Boar worms are native to Gulbanzi." "But," Breen began, then stopped, open-mouthed. "How?" she finally asked. "I don't know. Perhaps the Gulbanzi recently sent a saboteur to your world, or perhaps they've been here far longer." "The lower levels," Breen said, standing. "Madam President." "You seem to be very loyal to a president who has your brother in a work camp," the doctor said with an expression which demanded an explanation. "I swore an oath to the Constitution," Breen began. "And then the Constitution was amended," the doctor asked pointedly. "Yes?" Breen turned away for a moment, staring into the darkness. "Yes," she said finally. "Hugh Thompson," the doctor said flatly. "Who?" "An Earth soldier who stopped his own side from butchering civilians. Old men, women, children, babies. His people hated him for 30 years until they finally came around. It seems to me that you face a similar choice." Breen turned to face the doctor. "I don't care what people think of me. I have a duty." "To whom?" the doctor asked coldly. "To whoever happens to be sitting behind the big desk, just following orders. If so, let's part ways now. But then how will you find your way to level 30? And how will Megando get out of the mess it's made for itself? Perhaps that comet is the least of your worries." Breen stared into the doctor's eyes for a moment, then turned away. "I never thought it would come to this," she half whispered. "It has. We have 2 days to divert that comet, and we need a way through 10 feet of solid rock. Then we do what's best for the people of this planet, or at least I will." At last, Breen nodded. "All right, for the people of Megando. We need a way down to level 29, preferably one that won't get us killed. My access stops at this floor. If I tamper with the lift controls, whoever's in charge will know we're here. I don't want to risk that yet," the doctor added. Breen rubbed her eyes, trying to rid herself of the image of the lieutenant. "How do these boar worms attack?" she asked. "Normally they're found in rubbish tips. These must have been weaponized. And you don't know how these genetically engineered boar worms might attack us?" The doctor shook his head. "All I know is that it's quick. That lieutenant's sidearm was still in its holster." "Jumping?" Breen asked. "Flying?" "We'll assume jumping. They may aim for our mouths." "Riot gear," Breen suggested. "Those helmets will cover our heads and faces in blast-proof plastic, and the suit consists of trans-carbon armor." "Perfect," the doctor replied. "Where are they stored?" "Follow me," Breen said. She took a step toward the door and halted. Sweat appeared on her forehead and she began to tremble. "Of all the ways to die," she muttered, "being eaten alive is the last way I want to go." "It's not high on my list either," the doctor said. "But for people like us, there's no such thing as a safe space." Breen turned to the doctor and saw a look on his face she could not quite describe. A mixture of an old man who had seen too much and a young man who would keep fighting, even when the cause was lost. She took a deep breath and stepped out the door. The doctor followed. The station was now running on condition yellow 2, according to several flashing signs. The explosion had caused a few cuts and bruises, but nothing too serious. The door to the command deck would no longer close, so K9 stood in the doorway on guard duty. He had already analyzed the main computer and determined it had been hopelessly corrupted by the droid, which was now stacked in pieces along a bulkhead. K9 suggested that they reboot the main computer and restore it to its last saved state. Manance reluctantly agreed, explaining that the reboot might take an hour or more, assuming that it rebooted at all. Ultimately, they put the backup mainframe in control and shut down the main computer. The lights flickered for a minute, but soon everything appeared normal. "Try not to overtax it," Manance warned. "It's older than we are." Everyone laughed at the joke. Cod Gottfried will inspect the medical section. Everyone else, make sure the mainframe is up to scratch, but give Romana priority to find out what that droid was up to. Then he left the command deck with Gottfried and Cod. Romana had plugged the droid's memory chips into the mainframe and was busy decrypting the information. Wilkins spoke with Duff and Smith on the other side of the deck, then approached Romana. "Any luck?" "Slowly getting there," Romana replied, absorbed with the progress displayed on a screen. "Fortunately, I studied cryptography long ago." "You seem to be a woman of many parts," Wilkins said, smiling. "Roboticist, engineer, cryptologist." "Well, when you've lived as long as I have." "What?" Wilkins replied. "But you can't be more than, well, I never like to guess a lady's age." Romana turned to him and smiled coolly. "I was old before your great-grandmother was born." Wilkins appeared shocked and for once at a loss for words. "My goodness!" he finally exclaimed. "How are the others holding up?" Romana asked, moving on to more immediate concerns. "Yes, well," Wilkins began, still recovering from the shock. "They're under considerable stress, as you can imagine. But they're hanging on. But everything's taking so long while the mainframe is occupied. I should be finished soon, hopefully. But one thing puzzles me. Why are mines stored on the command deck?" "They aren't," Wilkins replied with a smile. "At condition Red 1, they're moved from the munitions stores to this level via the security lift. That way, an invading force can't get at them." "Tell me, how are the 12 of you assigned to this station?" she asked with some suspicion. "You mean, what are a lot of old duffers doing here?" Wilkins replied with a laugh. "Eh?" Duff said. "Oh, no offense," Wilkins replied. "Ah," Duff muttered dismissively, turning back to his work. "Most of us have served here for 30 years, Wilkins continued. "About the time this place became very unpopular indeed. They said we were destroying the environment, but in spite of less and less help from the surface, we've managed to keep this place going somehow." "What happened on Megando?" "Oh, a number of things. Terrible mistakes. Women had been barred from formal education as long as anyone can remember, so their mothers and grandmothers taught young girls in secret, and quite right too. When I was a young man, there was a push to allow women into schools and so on, but I'm afraid my generation failed them. Failed all of us, really. That's when our society began to fall apart. You can't have a functioning state when half of the population refuses to follow the rules." "I can't blame them," Romana said. "Nor can I," Wilkins added. "Soon every decision became political. This station, for example. Because men had built it, the women wanted to close it down. There were other reasons, of course, but looking back now, it seems like so much childish bickering, on both sides. And now that we've lost contact with..." The computer beeped. Romana and Wilkins turned to a screen. "About 85% of the data has been recovered," Romana said, reading quickly. "We've lost the rest. The droid's mission was to sabotage the station, then hijack it. It wanted to interrogate the crew to find out who was needed to fly the ship and who was expendable." "Oh my," Wilkins muttered. "But it appears we have a new problem." "What's that?" Wilkins asked. "This droid killed Walken and then came here. So, who moved Walken's body?" "A second droid," Wilkins muttered. "And there's something else," she added. "The last instructions this droid received were sent from Megando itself." The doctor and Breen moved slowly and quietly through the gloom toward a security station. The air smelled of blood, which they hoped would disguise their scent. They stepped carefully around bodies, debris, anything in their path. Soon they found a main road and reached an intersection. "It's that way," Breen pointed to the opposite corner of the road. The doctor looked in all directions. "No time like the present," he said, then proceeded as quietly as he could. Breen caught up to him, but in her haste, stepped on something that cracked under her boot. Then they heard something move on their left. Breen turned, but before she could react, something flew at her face. She cried out, closing her eyes and turning away while blocking her head with her arms. "I've got it," the doctor said quietly. Breen slowly turned toward the doctor. His arm was outstretched, and he was holding a wiggling worm-like creature, about 6 or 7 inches long. It tried to bite his hand with a large circular mouth. "Meet the boar worms," he whispered. Breen took a step back, still covering her mouth. Then they heard more movement to their left. The doctor threw the boar worm toward whatever it was, then grabbed Breen's hand. "Hurry!" he cried. They took off toward the security station and found their way inside. The doctor slammed the door, and they heard thuds as boar worms collided with it. Finally, there was silence. "Thank you," Breen said, half out of breath. "Don't thank me yet. They're probably in here too." Breen looked around. The lights were off. The windows allowed in some light, but not much. They could not hear anything. "Well, at least we know they can't fly," the doctor said as he began searching the room. "Not so loud," Breen hissed. "They know where we are," the doctor said, shrugging. "We have to assume their next attack will be coordinated." "Why?" "Because when I expect the worst," the doctor replied. "To be disappointed is delightful." Breen rubbed her eyes with her palms, then caught her breath. "Let's head to the back." She took a step and suddenly felt searing pain on her right calf. She screamed and fell to the ground, grabbing the boar worm that had attached itself to her and was trying to eat its way into her leg. As she pulled, the pain became so great she thought she might pass out, but she pulled anyway. Then she heard a high-pitched whine, and the boar worm released itself. The doctor grabbed it from her and crushed its head under the heel of his boot. Breen looked at her leg. It was bleeding, but the wound was not serious. The doctor helped her up onto her other leg. "First aid?" he asked. "Same place as the riot gear," she gasped through gritted teeth. Together they slowly finished making their way to the back. Soon, the doctor had treated and bandaged the wound, and Breen could almost stand on both legs again. "Just don't run or jump, unless you have to," the doctor warned. "The anesthetic will wear off in a few hours." "I'll manage," Breen replied. "But I can't wear full gear now. Too heavy." "You can wear this, at least," the doctor said, handing her a riot helmet. "Something is better than nothing?" Breen asked, putting it on. "Always," he replied as he rummaged through the stores. "Don't lose heart now." "How did you make the worm let go?" she asked. "I made it nauseous." "What?" "You are quite tasty, after all, to a boar worm. My sonic screwdriver emitted a frequency that rattled its inner ear, making it lose its appetite, so to speak." "Can't you do that with all of them?" "If I had an amplifier and a large speaker, yes. But what I have might not be enough to," he said, then stopped short, looking at something on the floor. "What is it?" Breen asked. "A police sergeant, presumably," he said, backing away. "There's nothing we can do for him now." Breen sighed and turned away. She closed her eyes tight to stay focused. "What about communications?" she asked after a moment. "Let's take a look." The doctor followed her to the communications room, but the power was off. "Each station has its own power cell," Breen said in disbelief. "They don't just turn off." "Our saboteur is most thorough," the doctor said. "Perhaps it's time we met him." "Or her," Breen added. "Indeed. Let's go back to the lift," he said, holding out his sonic screwdriver and emitting the same sound as before. "It's past time we announced ourselves." Romana, Wilkins, and K9 met Manance as he exited the medical section. "Well?" he demanded. "Bad news, sir," Wilkins said. "It's likely a second droid is on board." "Then why didn't you call me?" "There is a 59% probability that the droid is monitoring communications," K9 replied. "Then we must stop using comms at once," Manance cried. "If we do that," Romana said, "it'll know that we know it's listening." "Ah," Manance replied. Good thinking. But if it is here, what does it want? More importantly, what do you plan to do about the comet? It's a little more than a day away," Romana pointed out. Manance sighed and said, "I see no other alternative than to aim this station at the comet, use our emergency thrusters, then blow the reactors. That might bash it out of the way." "I'm afraid I agree with you, sir," Wilkins said. "Thank you, Wilkins." "Probability of success," K9 said, his ears whirring. 10%. This assumes that the droid has not immobilized the thrusters." They were all silent for a moment. "I'm afraid there's more bad news," Romana added. "The droid has been receiving instructions for Magando." "What?" Manance gasped. How did... "We don't know, sir," Wilkins added, "but there's nothing we can do about it now. Not until we're able to contact the surface." Manance did his best to calm down. Yes, you're right. But to send a spy to our world, such a shabby trick." Finally, he snapped out of it and barked, "Wilkins, get some men down to thruster control at once. Half there and half on the command deck. We're back on condition Red 1. "Sir." "We'll meet you there," Romana announced. Before Manance could argue, she turned and said, "Come along, K9. "Affirmative, mistress," K9 replied, following her down the corridor. "Brave girl," Manance said, watching her depart, taking on a droid almost single-handed. "Not a girl, sir," Wilkins corrected. She's older than we are. Don't talk rubbish, Wilkins, Manans snapped. She isn't a day over 26. Now go issue the orders personally. We don't want to tip this droid off, do we? Romana and K9 found the lift and took it to thruster control. K9, I have an idea, Romana began. A little later, when the lift finally stopped, they stepped out to see flickering lights. The air smelled as if something had shorted out. K9's ears whirred as Romana said, I don't like the looks of this. Suggest we return, K9 began, then was kicked 100 feet down the corridor. He bounced to a halt and went silent. Before Romana could turn, her body was wrapped in metallic tentacles, one of which had her by the throat. She tried to cry out but could not catch her breath. She was just beginning to see stars when a robotic voice said, Submit. The doctor and Breen made it back to the lift with only one further worm attack. It had struck the back of Breen's helmet, almost pitching her forward, but the screwdriver had worked better than the doctor had hoped. They were in a large cave after all, and the sound echoed clearly. Once they were inside, they locked the doors. The doctor began taking the controls apart. Are you sure you won't drop us straight down? Breen asked. How far can it be? 30 feet. Breen was not sure if he were joking or not. Finally, the elevator began dropping slowly. It stopped at the 29th floor. Do we get out? Breen asked. What's down here? The doctor responded. Stores, water, food, everything perishable, packed in salt. So there won't be as many boar worms. The doctor opened the door and they looked around. They were surrounded by large water tanks, enough for a city to survive a drought for years. The cavern was dimly lit, and they could not hear any movement. One more level, Breen said, reaching for the controls. No, the doctor hissed, grabbing her wrist. Let's step out. Breen nodded. The doctor let go, and they exited. Then the doctor shut the lift and sent it down to the 30th floor. As they heard it descend, Breen said, I hope we can get it back. She was interrupted by an explosion from the level below that shook her off her feet. She landed awkwardly, but the doctor helped her up. A booby trap? Yes, the doctor said. Our saboteur is clever. We'll have to find another way down. What about air ducts? He then asked, looking around at the ventilation system on the walls and ceiling. Breen chuckled. Those old movies where people used them to sneak into high-security areas. We saw them too. You'd have to be a cat to crawl through these. Which leaves water pipes. Breen nodded. But even if we find a pipe large enough, it'll lead to a sealed tank. The odds of us surviving without oxygen tanks. They heard a clang at the far end of the cavern, then the sounds of something approaching. Hide, the doctor hissed. I'm not going to leave you to face the music, Breen began. Yes, you are. It sounds like robots to me and they'd shoot you dead. But I'm not human. They'll want to question me. Then maybe I can get at our saboteur. Then what do I do? Find a way down and get me out of the mess I'm about to get myself into, he said sternly. Breen was about to argue, but the sounds of robots drew ever closer. Reluctantly, she limped into a dark corner to hide. The doctor stepped into the light as soon as the robots appeared around the nearest tank. 5 silver, 1 gold. In a moment, he was surrounded. Who are you? Gold asked. I'm the doctor, President Emeritus of the High Council of Time Lords on Gallifrey. Truthful statement, Gold said. Pending orders. They waited for several seconds as the doctor's eyes darted about looking for a way out. He found none. You will be interrogated, Gold stated. The robots began moving the doctor toward wherever they had entered this level. Am I to see Madam President? He asked loudly. Madam President is dead, Gold replied. The doctor sighed. He had hoped for better news and wondered if Breen would have the heart to follow him. On the command deck, the crew looked passively and helplessly at the monitor, which had begun working again. There was Romana, wrapped in black tentacles, gasping for breath. She was trying to speak, but utterly unable. You will surrender this station, a robotic voice said, or your leader dies. You have 1 hour. Then the screen went blank. Did you hear that? Erupted Manans. That thing's threatening to kill both me and Romana. I'm afraid, sir, Wilkins began. It was only referring to Romana. Her? Our leader? I've been in command of this station. There isn't time for that, sir, Smith interrupted. That young lady has helped us. Now we have to do the same. A counterattack? Manans asked. But that droid will kill her, Wilkins protested. Aye, but it'll kill her anyway, Duff replied. It's after the station. We're just in its way. Private Duff may be right, Captain Manans, Gottfried said. Captain Manans, Cod said. Yes, Cod? I don't want to die. Manans patted Cod's arm. I know, lad. But neither does Romana, Cod continued. Manans looked at Cod, whose face looked more like a man's than he had ever seen before. Manans turned to his men, then nodded. "All right, we won't take this lying down, and may God help that poor girl." The doctor was led by the robots to another lift. Soon, they were at the 30th and lowest level. The doctor stepped out and was guided through a narrow passage towards a well-lit room. Gold moved past him and reached the room first. Finally, the doctor entered. It was a white control room with a well-dressed alien sitting in an office chair, watching several large screens at once. He was yellow-skinned, bald, had wide eyes and pointed ears. A Gulbansi. Gold stood beside him. The Gulbansi turned to the doctor and looked him up and down. "A former president of Earth?" he asked. "Former president of the High Council of Time Lords on Gallifrey?" "The same. And you are?" The alien rose. "Sheba Jurgen," he said, straightening his jacket. The doctor bowed. "I'm delighted to meet one of the exalted rank of Sheba." Jurgen looked astonished. "You know our customs? Usually I have to spend 3 minutes explaining that Sheba is a title, not a name. Usually I have to spend 5 minutes explaining why destroying a planet is immoral." Jurgen motioned the doctor toward a chair and returned to his own. The doctor sat and realized that he was seated lower than Jurgen, who looked down on him. He stood and said, "I'd rather stand." Then he began studying the screens in front of him. Jurgen pressed a button, and the screens went blank. "If you're referring to the comet, that was not our plan." "Just a happy accident?" the doctor asked, facing Jurgen. "Unhappy accident," Jurgen corrected. "It was never our goal to destroy Magando. We only wanted the minerals in this system." He tutted and shook his head. "So it wasn't you," the doctor muttered to himself. Jurgen shook his head. "No. Now, I'm faced with the diplomatic problem of what to do with you before I leave. Of course, you'll claim your people know you're here, that they knew of my mission, and that my world will suffer if you should die, and so on. Stay here," the doctor said, interrupting, "and help me divert this comet. If it were possible, I'd consider it, but there's nothing I or anyone else can do. I'm a Time Lord. Work it out. And have you nipped back in time and prevent me from arriving on Magando in the first place? I think not." "That's neither my plan nor intention," the doctor countered. "I wish I could believe you," Jurgen said, his face showing genuine concern. "But I cannot." There was movement behind them, then a scream. The doctor turned to see 3 silver robots dragging Undersecretary Haining, who appeared only half conscious. The robots were about to drop her, but the doctor caught her and moved her to a sofa at the side of the room. "Such compassion," Jurgen said, watching this. "She would have let you die, if not for your rank." The doctor set her down. Haining appeared lost in a bad dream, trying to wake up. "Why did you do this to her? Why kill Madam President?" "It was a threat," Jurgen explained. "Surrender or die. They didn't surrender, so I kept a few of them alive, in case they might change their minds. She was being persuaded. Tortured. I'm not here to debate morality," Jurgen said. "If the planet's going to be destroyed, why do this? Her surrender would have made our war legal. There is a larger galaxy watching us, Doctor." "And now?" Jurgen shrugged. "The planet will be destroyed. Some will suspect us, but it will be difficult for them to take action, since they'll half believe we did it. But I'm telling you," the doctor said, "I can stop this." "How?" "Release me and I'll show you." "Please," Jurgen muttered with a dismissive wave of his hand. Haining moaned and sat up. "Doctor," she murmured. The doctor quickly moved to her side and held her hand. "It's all right, Haining." "Who is that?" she asked, pointing at Jurgen. "I can't see without my glasses." "I'm the reason you won your revolution," Jurgen said as he studied the computer behind his desk. "What?" Haining asked. "Who is he?" "A Gulbansi spy." "How did you get here?" she asked. "This was supposed to be Madam President's command center." "It's been my home for several years," Jurgen replied, "where I've been the de facto ruler of your world for some time." "But we, the women of Magando," she began. "Spare me the rhetoric," Jurgen said. "I wrote most of it myself. You see, I was the one who encouraged people like you to riot in order to weaken Magando and help my side win this war." "What?" she cried feebly. "But how did you get down here in the first place?" the doctor asked. Jurgen smiled. "Some politicians will do anything to get elected." "Well, perhaps you helped our cause," Haining said, trying to make sense of what had happened to her and her world in the last few days. "If the zoo animals of Magando had wanted to riot, I would have helped them." "You mean you watched us live our lives under the thumb of—" "Oh, do be quiet," Jurgen replied. How can you be so— Haining began. Jürgen turned towards her sharply. I'm Gulbansi. Not only are we your enemy, we're hermaphrodites. Why should we take sides in some pathetic gender war? No, all we wanted was your minerals. If you burned your own world in order to exact petty vengeance, well, that's on you. Then he returned to his computer. Haining turned to the doctor, wide-eyed and trembling. What does he mean? She asked feebly. He means your world fell a long time ago, from the inside. Well put, Doctor, Jürgen replied without looking up, and it was easier than pitting black ants against purple ants. How could you? Haining cried, rising on unsteady legs. How could you imprison your father's brothers, husbands, sons? Jürgen asked rhetorically. And yet, he said, turning to her, you did. Haining's knees gave out, and she collapsed onto the sofa. She buried her face in her hands and began weeping softly. The doctor stood and faced Jürgen. I can still pull the comet away with aluminium from the Constantinople 12. There's not enough time, and even if there were, I don't trust you. Then perhaps you should know, the doctor replied. I'm most dangerous when I'm cornered. So am I, Jürgen said, pressing a button. The entire screen showed one wall-sized image, Romana entangled by a Gulbansi droid, her throat wrapped in its metal tentacles. Doc, Romana tried to whisper. Save your breath, the doctor ordered. Then he spun toward Jürgen. Let her go. Why, so she can help Maganda with this war? Because she's trying to stop that comet from striking. Possibly, he mused. Then he shrugged. Your companion, or whoever she is going to die. The doctor stiffened. In response, Gold moved threateningly between Jürgen and the doctor. So will Haining, Jürgen said. You can stay and die with this planet, he continued. Or come with me. In exchange for what? The doctor asked through gritted teeth. Oh, I'm sure a Time Lord might have a few secrets we'd like to know. K9? Cod was huddled next to K9, who was lying on his side where he had fallen and looking worse for wear. After a moment, one ear began to whir. Shh! Cod shushed him as quietly as he could, then looked over to where the droid was holding Romana in front of a security camera. It did not seem to have noticed them. Can you move? Cod whispered. Set me upright, K9 said quietly but haltingly. Cod kept an eye on the droid and strained to put K9 back into an upright position as quietly as he could. Once K9 was up again, his one ear whirred as he carried out a self-diagnostic. Are you fit enough? Cod asked. This unit stands at 63% efficiency, K9 replied. I hope that's enough because we have a plan, Cod continued. Where can I plug in this communications cable? Cod held out a thin cable that was connected to the wall. All right, the doctor finally agreed. I'll come with you. But you must let Romana go. He pointed over his shoulder toward Romana's image. Why? Jürgen asked. Because she has my dog. Come again? That comet has a core harder than diamond. No one knows what it is, but you might want to know before anyone else. This war is about minerals, after all. All right, Jürgen said, nodding. But why the dog? My dog has the data you want, and Romana has my dog. Jürgen turned to Gold. Truth assessment? While some speculation is present, Gold replied, statements are truthful. Jürgen turned to the doctor and raised an eyebrow. Then he pressed a button on his computer. Don't kill her, he ordered. On the screen, the tentacles around Romana's neck loosened, and she fell forward, taking deep breaths. She looked under her left arm and saw Cod with K9. Then she straightened up. Romana? The doctor asked. Can you hear us? Romana nodded, and she continued to breathe deeply. Romana, where's my dog? The doctor then asked. Your dog? Romana cried between gasps. He's as much my dog as yours. We can't go into that now. Oh yes, we can get into that now. How dare you suggest he's not my dog? Now wait, Jürgen began. Shut up, whoever you are, Romana snapped. K9, are you ready? Affirmative, mistress. Suddenly, the droid standing behind Romana stiffened. As the doctor and Jürgen stared around them, the same thing happened to the silver and gold robots. What are you doing? Jürgen cried. You know what they say about Gulbansi programming, the doctor said with a wicked smile. Lacks both verve and firewalls. Jürgen ran behind his desk. The silver robots flew at him, but he gunned them down with his blaster. He then pointed the weapon at the doctor. I regret nothing, the doctor pronounced gravely. Jürgen said nothing as he pulled the trigger, but 2 shots were fired. One hit Jürgen in the shoulder, who dropped to the floor. The other went wild and hit the screen, destroying Romana's image. The doctor turned. Breen was breathing heavily as she turned her gun toward Gold. "No, wait!" the doctor cried. Breen put up her weapon as Gold turned toward the doctor. "What are your orders?" it asked. "Everyone who is still alive in this facility is to be given top medical care, including Jürgen," the doctor replied. "Start with her," he added, pointing to Haining, who was looking around wide-eyed and shocked. "What did you do?" she asked. "Romana and K9 used the network to hack these robots, turning them against Jürgen," the doctor said. "You know Major Breen, of course. She's overdue for promotion." "Undersecretary!" Breen cried as she holstered her weapon and ran to help Haining. She looked so different that Breen had not initially recognized her. The doctor turned to the controls. All communications were down. "Some kind of safety cutout," the doctor muttered. He moved over to Jürgen, who was lying on the floor, clutching his shoulder. "Help me," the yellow alien muttered. "How do I turn on voice comms?" the doctor asked. Jürgen said nothing. "Shall I ask Breen to join us?" the doctor inquired with a quizzical raise of an eyebrow. Jürgen's eyes went wide. "You wouldn't," he gasped. "Bree," the doctor began. Jürgen spoke the passphrase, and the comms began to work. "Romana, can you hear me?" the doctor asked. The lift opened, and the men of the Constantinople 12 leapt out with rifles at the ready. They found Romana working at the comm controls, Cod sitting on K9's back, and the droid obeying Cod's every command. "Now do a handstand!" Cod cried delightedly. The droid complied. "What is going on here?" Manans cried. Cod stood and saluted. "Your plan worked, Captain Manans." "It did?" "Oh, I mean, of course it did. I just didn't expect it to work that quickly." "And we didn't expect it to work at all," Duff muttered. "That'll do, Duff," Manans barked. "K9 was able to hack the droids just like that," Cod said, snapping his fingers. "That was very clever of you, K9," Wilkins congratulated. "The mainframe would have taken minutes." K9's ear whirred. "Praise is not necessary," he replied. "I was only obeying orders." "Now that's a very good dog," Manans said jovially. "Romana?" Wilkins asked, moving toward her. "I can't get through to the doctor, and we don't have much time to pull that comet out of its orbit," she stated grimly. "Romana, can you hear me?" The doctor's voice sprung from the comms. "Doctor, time's running out," Romana replied. "K9?" the doctor asked. K9's ear whirred. "There is no longer enough time to use aluminium to pull the comet out of its orbit." "Oh no," Cod said sadly. "We'll ram it," Manans cried. "Probability of success less than 0.1%, K9 said. "Comet now too close to Megando for such a plan to succeed." "Then there's only one thing left," the doctor said. "Land on it and dematerialize it." "Then come pick me up so we—" Romana began. "Not enough time," the doctor interrupted. "But this is a job for 6 pilots. One person can't do it alone." "Romana," the doctor said, "I'm still miles below the TARDIS and we're already low on time." There was a horrible silence. "Hurry then, Doctor," Haining's voice said. "For all our sakes," Manans added. "I will," the doctor replied. The doctor turned off the comms and turned to Breen. "I need a way to the surface. Now." "I'll come with you." "Not on that leg." "There's an express lift 1,000 feet from here," Haining said. "Out the door 2 lefts. Don't worry about us." "Gold," the doctor said, "you're with me." He ran through the darkness with Gold at his side until they found the lift. They boarded and used the emergency protocol to take them to level 1. "Who's up there? Is there still fighting?" "Yes," Gold replied. "I must get to my TARDIS." "Do you mean the blue box?" "Yes." Gold raised its blaster arm. "But try not to kill anyone," the doctor quickly added. "Plan 14, 5 to be put into effect," Gold responded. "What does that mean?" he asked. But the doors opened, and Gold departed before any reply. Immediately, the doctor was hit by what could only be described as the smell of 1,000,000 rotten eggs. He threw a handkerchief over his face and ran just behind Gold. Someone stepped out of the gloom and took a swing at the doctor with a cricket bat. The doctor dodged in time, and Gold hit the man, who fell groaning to the floor. Gold took the doctor's arm, leading him through the few who remained, until the doctor was standing outside the TARDIS doors. "Now protect Breen and Haining, and make sure Jürgen doesn't escape," the doctor ordered as he put his key into the TARDIS lock. Gold peeled away to carry out its orders as the doctor slammed the doors shut. Then he ran to the controls and set course for the Tstasutyun comet. "What's he planning to do?" Wilkins asked Romana. "Something the TARDIS was never designed to do, or at least something one pilot could never do. He'll land on the comet and try to dematerialize with it." "Then why doesn't he want you along?" "Because he has something of a hero complex," Romana replied, And because it's impossible. He knows if I were on board, I'd be killed too. She lowered her head and turned away from the others. The TARDIS landed on the comet. It was now less than an hour from Megando. The doctor double-checked. Even if this failed completely, the Constantinople 12 might just be safe, assuming the exploding planet did not destroy it. "All right, old girl," the doctor said, looking at the control panel. "This is it." He set the controls, closed his eyes, held his breath, and flicked a switch. Everything seemed to explode at once. The doctor could barely see anything, but there was no fire, no explosions. He realized whatever it was inside his head. Mostly. It was the space-time vortex, he realized. He could see it swirling, cascading, rising, falling as the shell of the TARDIS began to break down and the chaos of the vortex began to seep in. He could not remember a journey being so rough. Wait, yes, he could. That journey after he and his granddaughter Susan had spent those months on Earth. Susan had gone to school, and 2 teachers had followed her back to the TARDIS. Susan had threatened to leave him, so he took off and the TARDIS almost ripped itself apart. He never did learn why. And now, it was happening again. The doctor worked the controls as fast as his hands would allow. He turned on the screen to watch his progress. The TARDIS and the comet were slowly blinking out of normal space-time, but not quickly enough. They were closing in on Megando despite his best efforts. The shaking, the turbulence, the noise all got worse. The doctor tried to concentrate, but he could barely complete one task before another required his full attention he could not spare. But then a second pair of hands appeared alongside his, working with him, completing one task, then another. He could not see who it was, but they kept working until there was a loud crash, and the doctor braced himself against the console. He looked up at the screen. Somehow Megando was still there, and Stesutsion had passed it by. The doctor turned to thank whoever it was, but could see no one. Then he braced himself against the railings as the world faded to black, and he felt himself sliding to the floor. Sometime later, the doctor stepped out of the TARDIS, and he found himself in a park. It was late spring, and the birds were singing. He looked around suspiciously. "This isn't the Constantinople 12, he muttered. He saw several people walking through the park without any apparent concern for the comet or the war. He closed the TARDIS doors and took a few more steps. "I set the controls for—" Then he saw a blue and white robot racing toward him. The doctor turned and took out his key. He was almost inside when the robot said, "Madam President requests your presence at the Presidential Palace." The doctor turned. The robot did not seem threatening. "Tell her I'm busy," he said. "I need to find the Constantinople 12. "The Constantinople 12 was decommissioned a year ago," the robot said. "What?" the doctor replied. "Repeat. Madam President Romana requests your presence." The presidential palace was everything the doctor expected it to be. He was ushered into a spacious conference room where Romana was addressing a number of people in expensive clothes. "And as you can see," Romana said, pointing to a graph, "this agricultural data prompts us to ask, where the hell have you been?" The second part of her question was aimed, of course, at the doctor. "I take it I'm late," the doctor replied. "I'm so sorry." Before the doctor could complete his apology, Romana had rushed forward and hugged him. "It's nice to see you again," she said, stepping back. "How long?" he asked. 5 years, 9 months, 6 days, and 19 hours, came a voice at his feet. K9 sat there, looking better than ever, both ears whirring. "Good dog," the doctor said. "Affirmative, Master," K9 replied. "And I think you've met the Minister for the Interior," Romana said, introducing the doctor to— "Breen!" the doctor cried. "Doctor!" Breen said, smiling. "I'm glad you're alive. Romana told us you were, but— Yes, well, I can explain everything. Almost. Romana, this makes you president twice over." "And she's done a terrific job," Breen said. "It's been a pleasure to watch her work." "That's very nice of you, Janet." "Janet?" asked the doctor. "Janet. Her first name," Romana said slowly with emphasis. "Ah, yes. Sorry. Didn't catch that 5 years ago. Speaking of which, what happened to the crew of the space station? And to Haining and Jurgen?" "The crew survived," Breen replied with a smile. "They were honorably discharged and given fat pensions. A few are still with us. Cod is working toward a PhD in robotics, as a matter of fact." "How's he doing?" the doctor asked. "You'll have to ask his professor," Romana replied. "His progress is satisfactory," K9 said. "As for Haining," Romana continued, "she died of her injuries a few days later." "I'm sorry to hear that. She was a hero in the end." Jurgen was put on trial for espionage, mass murder, and 100 other charges. His people abandoned him, and he was convicted and executed. The doctor's face twisted into a half-frown. Ah, still a little bloodthirsty, I see. Oh well, baby steps, he said with resignation. Romana looked a trifle needled, and yet a small smile escaped at his manner. One does what one can, she pronounced airily. And the war? The doctor asked. It's over now, thanks to our planetary coalition, Breen said. In fact, things are going so well it could become a new chapter in galactic history. The doctor and Romana smiled at each other but said nothing. And now that the doctor's here, Romana said, turning to her colleagues, I resign. Come along, K9. She took the doctor's arm and, despite the uproar behind her, led him out of the palace. But Madam President, Breen said, following them closely, Vice President Haddoke is in Evergreen Canton, opening the new hospital. Yes, a capable man. He won't need my help. But at least let me say goodbye, Breen said. They stopped just outside the palace. Goodbye, Breen, the doctor said. Goodbye, Janet, Romana said. Goodbye. I'll miss you. She looked down. Especially you, K9. K9's ears whirred. Affirmative. Someday, the doctor said as they strolled through the park with K9 by their side, you must tell me how you got yourself elected. Oh, that was simple. Half of the electorate demanded a woman, and the other half would only accept a woman who wasn't McGandon. I won by a landslide, twice. Well, you're an excellent administrator, the doctor said. And you, Romana said, must tell me how you managed to move that comet all by yourself. I didn't. What? A time image, possibly. Someone from the past or the future. Someone? Romana interjected. Just an impression, the doctor shook his head. Did you ever learn more about that satellite? Romana shook her head. Nothing. They reached the TARDIS, and the doctor took out his key. Never mind. It was quite atomized, he said with a shrug, and the universe is a big place. I doubt we'll ever see one again.
Masters, mistresses, the Doctor requires materials in order to maintain the TARDIS and ensure continued functionality. He similarly requires carbon-based comestibles to sustain his own biological functions and existence. Master would never say this, but he requires aid beyond that supplied by this unit in order to acquire these. To aid the Doctor in his various tasks and creations, this can be most effectively achieved via Patreon or Substack subscriptions, or through donations directly to PayPal. Or if you desire physical goods in return for your contributions, written accounts of my travels with the Doctor are also available on Amazon. Links are in the description below. Thank you, Masters, mistresses.